This is Dr. Rich Shuttler. This lesson is lesson number 8, titled Informed Consent and Confidentiality. In this lesson, I will address what is informed consent and confidentiality, as well as how you may allude to it in your Chapter 3. I will share several examples from my mentees and then conclude this lesson with a reflective summary. Informed consent. Informed consent reflects permission from participants involved. For everybody who's going to be in your survey population, you must have their informed consent. You have to have their approval. Depending on how you collect your data will depend on how you gain their approvals. You may do an online survey through an organization such as SurveyMonkey.com, wherein once people start your survey, the first thing will be some information about informed consent, and they have to agree or disagree. If they agree, they move forward into the actual survey. If they disagree, then they're let go and they don't get any survey questions. If you happen to do interviews where you're going to do them face to face, you will more than likely at that stage have this on paper, and you'll have the informed consent form available, where before you ask any questions, before the survey begins, they will read through the informed consent form, sign it, and date it, thus giving their permission that way. Informed consent is a legal aspect, and it helps to protect the different stakeholders involved. For the first stakeholder, the participants, it helps everybody to understand that the participants, the survey population that you have read the informed consent and they have given their permission for the data to be used. I'll cover more on exactly what they're consenting to, but the informed consent is a legal aspect which protects the participant. It also protects you, the researcher. If your work is challenged in the future, whether that be by a dissertation committee member, the university, or long after it's published, you want to be able to substantiate that what you did was legal and ethical, and that everybody involved in your survey population gave you their permission to be used as a research subject, depending on what your work is, whether that be a survey or an interview, or perhaps they're involved in a focus group, or they're in an observation type research. But it does protect you, and this is important. I'll address this more as I go through this lesson. And it also protects the university. You have to remember that the university's reputation, their accreditation, is also concerned with the legalities of informed consent, because they are the ones who are actually approving your work. Now, they approve it much as your dissertation committee members do, and as you do, to provide the work that's legal and ethical. But the university also has to protect not only for their reputation, but for that of everybody who works for them. It's not uncommon that when universities are going through their accreditation process, that accreditors will want to see a certain amount of dissertations, and they'll review those dissertations in depth to see to what extent the dissertations are developed from a rigorous point of view, from a research point of view, and from the ethical point of view, which includes legalities. And this is why you have other parts of your dissertation that must go through an institutional review board. That IRB, if you will, helps that university to protect themselves. The informed consent shows actual research was done. It provides a trail of evidence that may be needed from time to time if somebody wants to go back and look at your work. For example, when you're doing your dissertation work, let's just say you completed your proposal, you had approved, you collected the data, and now you're submitting your work to your dissertation chair. Your dissertation chair may want to see some evidence that people actually signed the informed consent. Or before your dissertation is approved at the university, they may want to see several forms that were signed. That's okay. Everybody in those situations have signed and agree to confidentiality. So if your university leaders want to look and see several of your consent forms that were literally signed and dated, you would have to produce them. This helps on the check and balance. While it's not common that somebody's going to ask to see these consent forms, every once in a while the university will ask to see them to ensure, if you will, on a spot check basis, that students are doing their work in a legal and ethical way. As you'll find out in a few moments, that you need to keep these informed consent forms that are literally signed or evidence that they did electronically for 3 years. And that allows people to go back into your work in case they want to be able to see evidence. It is uncommon, but it does happen from time to time where some students will plagiarize their dissertation and they won't do it correctly. They may not actually literally want to do the surveys, or when they do surveys online, they don't get enough, so they end up doing them themselves, or they fake the data, or they mislead the data because there wasn't enough. This is called cheating, of course. It's an academic violation. But we know in a world that we live in today, as it always has been, some people will take the easy route. Some people will try and cheat instead of actually doing the work. This informed consent trail, if you will, helps not prove that nobody cheated, but helps to reduce the situation in case somebody tries to, and they may get caught in that spot check of their work. Informed consent informs participants of what their involvement will be. For example, if you plan to do 8 interview questions that are open-ended questions in a semi-structured interview process technique, that's going to take roughly 60 minutes. That helps the participants when they're reading the informed consent before they sign it to understand that their time frame is going to be about 60 minutes and they're going to be asked these questions. If you're going to have, for example, in SurveyMonkey.com, and your participants are going to go there and answer 72 questions, you would want to let them know their involvement is that they will be given 72 questions in a format where they'll be able to decide to what extent or to what degree, and perhaps roughly it will take them approximately 15 minutes to do the survey. The informed consent helps you to inform the participants of what's expected of them, in essence, that they can decide early on whether they want to do it or not. The last thing you want is for somebody to believe that they're only going to be needed for 30 minutes. You sit down with them, you get halfway through your questions, and they're thinking they're done and they want to leave, and you still have 3 or 4 more questions to go in another 30 minutes. They may decide that they don't want to do that then and then quit midway through. Then you've wasted their time. You've also wasted a lot of your time. Informed consent informs the participants of the purpose of the study. In your consent form, you'll basically cut and paste from your proposal the purpose of your study. This informs those who are going to consider whether they want to be part of your survey population what the study is about. What's the purpose for what you're doing? Why are you doing your research? If it's in an organization and you're wanting to find out what employees' opinions are of something, or if you're doing interviews of high school teachers and you want to gain their perceptions or their lived experiences of perhaps doing work with the No Child Left Behind policy, this helps them to understand the reasons why you're even asking them to do this work in the first place. There will be times for some students that they never meet the participants, and the survey is one piece that follows informed consent. You may actually email the informed consent form to people to review and decide whether they want to be in your study or not. So therefore, you are not there to answer questions, and you want to let them know as much information as you can about why you're doing what you're doing and the rationale for it. Informed consent informs participants of what will happen. How will this go? Are you going to be doing interviews in an office in their workplace? Are you going to be doing a survey online that they'll go to, and they'll have to go to a URL and then do the survey that way? Let them know what will happen. The participants want to know what will happen when they do the work, and then, as we'll find out in a few moments, what happens afterwards. It's not uncommon that people are going to be skeptical about joining you and helping you with your research. The more information you can give them of exactly what the purpose is, what their involvement is, what will actually happen in a step-by-step process will be beneficial to you. Let's say, for example, you're going to do those interviews, and it's going to take roughly 60 minutes to give them 8 open-ended questions. What will happen from that point forward? Once it's over with, what will happen with the data? Will you then have it transcribed? If so, how long afterwards? Will that transcription go back to the participants to be able to review for accuracy? If so, how long do they have to review it? If they don't reply to you, what will happen? Again, you're laying out the whole process of their involvement to make them feel extremely comfortable that their participation will go in a manner of how you're describing it. Informed consent informs the participants of any associated risks. There is different types of research. Some research requires people to do things other than just answer questions, whether that be in an interview or online where they're going through a Likert type survey. Are there any risks? Are there risks associated with doing an interview of high school teachers who may give you information or replies to your question that may counter what the high school leadership believes? If so, are there any risks? If there's confidentiality maintained and nobody ever knows which participant gave you the information, then the risk is relatively low. If you're doing any kind of interviews at random where you're picking out people in a workplace to come meet with you, is there any risk that some people will look at them differently because they were pulled aside and asked questions? You have to consider every potential ramification to the participants. The more you can make them feel at ease that there are no risks or very low risks, this will be helpful to you. This is one of the reasons why we first ask that if you're going to do a survey in an organization, that you have consent from an organizational leader saying that you have consent to go speak with any employees and that any involvement of employees will not be looked upon in any manner positively or negatively, and you actually have permission to go speak with employees. Then when you go to the actual survey participants, you can show them that the risks are extremely low. You have permission from their leaders to be involved. Think of any potential risk that you might find possible and then include that. Even if it's unlikely, you can always say it's unlikely that these risks will occur, but the more information, again, that you can provide to the people who are considering being one of your survey participants, the more likely you are to get people involved. The informed consent informs the participants of confidentiality. People are going to want to know if they're going to give you data, information, replies to your questions, that when you get that data, you're going to protect it. In the example of interviewing high school teachers, you want to make sure they know that when they're giving their interviews, their names will never be used, that there'll be a code associated with their name, and their names would only be known to you, and that's all. Nobody else. Your dissertation chair never needs to know. Your university never needs to know, unless, of course, they're doing a spot check, and all these people have already signed confidentiality agreements. But you will also not share the information with the company if, once the data is compiled and put together and your findings and the leaders of that organization are not happy, you need to make sure that the people who are going to participate in your survey feel comfortable that you'll never release the names of who said what. This is important. It's extremely important. This is part of the legal and ethical aspects. If all of a sudden you decided to go have a conversation with one of those senior leaders and you said that name of one of your survey participants, you could put their career in jeopardy. The informed consent also informs participants of the guidance to withdraw. If, for example, somebody was to get into doing your interview with you and you, at the third question, they felt uncomfortable and they no longer wanted to participate, your informed consent will help them to better understand that they can withdraw and the guidance on how to. For example, the guidance may simply be that if any time during the interview you want to withdraw, just indicate so, and then the interview will cease. And then you'll also tell them what will happen with any of the data. I'll talk about that in a minute. Even in an online setting in SurveyMonkey.com, in the consent, it would say that anytime you feel uncomfortable and you want to withdraw, all you have to do is close the browser. Again, it's very simple instructions, but it allows all the participants to know that if they get into it with you, if they want to get out, how do they let you know? The informed consent informs participants if they withdraw in the process, what will happen to them and the data collected to that point. Let's use the example of you interviewed somebody and after the third question they didn't feel comfortable or they had to leave for any reason, they decided to withdraw. In your informed consent, you should indicate that If that occurs at any point in the process that they withdraw, that the recordings will stop, they'll be dismissed, the interview will stop, and any data given to that point will not be used. It's important that you indicate that any data collected in a survey or any interview that is not completed will not be used. It's not fair, and it could skew the data in the end if you asked a couple people only the first 3 questions and everybody else the other 5 questions for a total of 8. Your data may not be true because it could be that in many cases the first couple questions lead up to how the final couple questions will be answered, and therefore could be incomplete. Same thing with an online survey. You may have within your survey several questions asking the same thing worded differently, and if you were to use partial data completion in a survey before, up to the point where somebody withdrew, it could throw off the data and cause it to produce information that's not correct. Again, all we're doing is informing the participants that if they withdraw, what will happen to them or the data collected. And the essence of what might happen to them, nothing will happen to them. And you need to help them to understand that if after the 3rd interview question they leave, you're not going to tell anybody that, this person halfway through the interview decided to quit and no longer go through because they were uncomfortable. It's as if they never walked in the door. It's as if you never had consent. Now, you would track how many people did withdraw, but you would never associate any names with or provide even any kind of rationale. If somebody decides in an interview that they don't want to withdraw, the best process at that point that I prescribe is say thank you and let them know what will happen. Don't ask them why. It's really none of your business. Your business was to get information about the survey. I suggest that you don't even get into a conversation because somebody, if they're feeling uncomfortable, or particularly if they feel like they need to leave for some reason, that indicates that they're unwilling to go and be involved as a willing participant. The best thing to do is end it and then move on to the next person. Informed consent informs the participants how much time it will take from their schedule. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, if you're going to have an interview and it's going to be done face-to-face with open-ended semi-structured questions, let them know that the interview will take roughly 60 minutes. I encourage you to not extend interviews much beyond 60 minutes or even focus groups, because you may find that people are unwilling to give you more than an hour. In many instances, 1 hour people are okay with. When you start asking somebody for an hour and a half or 2 hours or longer, you can imagine if somebody asked that to you and you have a busy schedule, how willing would you be to help somebody else out? In an online survey, you might also there indicate that there are 72 questions. It'll take you approximately 15 minutes. Now, how do you figure out what the approximate time will be? Well, you can, through yourself going through the questions or have other people go through the questions to get a time, or you can guesstimate, if you will, estimate about how long it will take to go through 72 questions. Give the participants information up front so when they make the appointment with you or they decide to go online and do your survey questions, that they're going to allow themselves enough time. The last thing you want somebody to do is go online, or many people to go online, thinking that's only going to take them 5 minutes to do a quick short survey, when in fact there's 72 questions and it's going to take 3 times as long as they thought. What will happen is near the end, you probably will not get data that's as accurate as you would like it to be. Informed consent informs the participants what will happen with their input and the process from that point. Again, it's much like if they withdraw. Here you want to tell the people in the consent form what will happen with their input, that their input, if it's an interview, that their interviews will be transcribed because they were recorded, they're put into a file, they're able to look at it and determine whether it's right or wrong. Any changes from that point, that's going to be consolidated with all the other people's inputs. It's going to be run through perhaps in vivo software. From that point forward, their input will be consolidated with others to produce Chapter 4 to represent all the data findings. Chapter 5 produce your recommendations, conclusions, and other information. And that after that, your work is going to go through a dissertation chair, committee review, or university review, approval, be published in ProQuest dissertations, or perhaps you're not going to publish it in ProQuest dissertations, but help the participants when they're deciding whether to help you when they're reading the informed consent form to get a sense of exactly what will happen at every step and the rationale for every step. Remember, Chapter 3 is about details. What kind of details? Yes, excruciating details. The informed consent acknowledges their understanding of the study and participation criteria. When they sign the informed consent form and they date it, they are signing that they agree to everything, they understand everything. They don't have to remember everything, that's okay. Some people will want a copy of that informed consent. I encourage you to have a copy already so when they sign it, or you give them a blank copy once they sign it where they have this blank copy which indicates everything they've done. They can decide if they want to throw it out or not or keep it. You never know. But it does help, I find, to have a copy that they can have. It makes them feel more comfortable in case anything should go wrong. Today's world is a little bit of a situation where a lot of people like to protect themselves, or if something goes wrong, they want to take a legal aspect or get involved with challenging. I find that the less opportunities for people to be afraid or concerned, that the easier it is to get help from them. So if there's something you can do to help reduce that, why not give them a copy? Informed consent, how to obtain it. Well, if you're doing it through face-to-face and they're actually going to sign and date it, well, then they're actually doing it that way. If they're doing it online, they can do it electronically. I encourage people to have the first page where it has the informed consent, where they read it, and they can't even move forward until they agree to it. If they say they do not agree to it, then that's the end of it, and they don't go any farther. I wouldn't even recommend that if they hit no, they don't want to go forward, that there's not another page. Are you sure you don't want to? To me, that's not good. I would just assume that if they said no, then they mean no. If they had the link and they hit no by chance and it was an error, they still have the link, they go back into it and redo it. But if you ask them, it's like badgering them at that point. Electronic signatures are fine for things that are done through SurveyMonkey.com. If you're going to have any specific way you're uncertain about, go back to your university in your dissertation chair and get information on how they want you to obtain the informed consent from the survey population. There are many different ways to do this, but you can get it electronically as well as getting it through the actual signed signature itself. Now, if you happen to be doing research with children or people who are protected classes, and particularly children, you would not have the children sign the form, but their parents would have to sign the form. Again, that's a different type of research in the sense that the people who are actually involved, i.e. the students, would not be signed the signature form, but it would be the parents who are giving their informed consent because they are the legal guardians of the children. I'll address confidentiality now. Confidentiality is for the ethical reasons, to protect the survey population. As I mentioned before, if you're going to do interviews, that their names will never be used. If somebody's going to be interviewed, that maybe from that point forward there'll be a code, and their code might be BC55 or DM52 or ABC574. Whatever coding system you're going to have or use is fine. You just have to decide which one, make sure it's appropriate for what you're doing, and then keep track. You would have this as far as knowing who did what surveys or the interviews. Nobody else, again, would have that information other than you. For confidentiality, it informs the survey population how their names will be protected. This helps them to better understand that you are going to protect their names and their reputations. Again, that there's no risk involved with them, or it's very low. I mean, you're not going to just leave their signed informed consent forms just laying around your desk, or just haphazardly leaving around at home or thrown in a trash can where somebody else could find them. Confidentiality indicates how data and information will be protected. You might indicate that you're going to take the signed forms and all the notes that you take, and that's going to be stored in a locked cabinet, perhaps in your workplace, or it's going to be locked in a secure place at home. Again, what are you going to do literally to protect the information? You certainly don't have to buy a post office box or rent one at a bank and put it there. You don't have to go out and buy yourself a 6-foot safe and put it in your office. That's not required. All we want to know is that you can and that you will protect the information and exactly how you will do it. The confidentiality indicates how long the data information will be retained. Most universities require 3 years. There are situations, depending on the research that you're doing, might be more of a sensitive nature than other types of research, and you may have to keep it longer. This is what you'll find out when you do your reviews of the information and guidance that your university provides to get your institutional review board approval. In most cases, having 3 years is long enough. Confidentiality indicates how the data and information will be destroyed. This may seem like common sense, but you have to remember, we're talking about details in Chapter 3. The more details you can provide, the better. How will you destroy it if it's a disk, for example, like a computer, CD-ROM? What will you do with that? Will you scratch it up? Will you break it in half? Will you burn it? Will you melt it? For the paper aspects, will you burn that? Will you shred it? What will you do? We want to make sure that you know you can't just take all this information and throw it in the dumpster at work because somebody could find it there. In most cases, you're never going to be challenged on any of this, but again, Chapter 3 is about details. Give all the information you can, how you're going to do it, and then the rationale for it. Confidentiality informs all involved that the researcher is aware of the related concerns. As a third-party person who reads your dissertation 2 or 3 or 5 years or 10 years from now, they're going to get some sort of perception about you. Were you professional? Did you understand everything? Also, as a dissertation chair in your university, they want to know everything that you're going to do to make sure that you're just not going about it haphazardly, but you learn this. Remember, this is still a learning vehicle, a dissertation. The more information you could put in there about how you're going to do what you're going to do, the rationale for everything, and the step-by-step process helps everybody understand that you are aware of the concerns and have taken them seriously. Now I'll share several examples with you from several of my mentees on how they alluded to this information in their dissertations. These examples are from my mentees who were approved on the first pass through. Each of them have given me their written consent to use their work. They own the copyright. They're fine with that, and they're open for letting their information help you. If you like what they're doing and you want to read more, I encourage you to go to ProQuest Dissertations online, look for their names, and download their dissertations. If you like what's there, there's nothing wrong with you sending them an email letting them know the value of their work. Dr. Patricia Schroeder in 2013, her dissertation titled A Quantitative Correlation Study of Individualism and Collectivism and Employee Innovation in Turkey, shared this information in her chapter. Remember, this is a dissertation, so everything's in the past tense. Informed consent protects participants' rights throughout the study process. And she cites Creswell. Each participant in the research study received a consent form that provided a description of the study and the participants' involvement in the study. First off, she starts here by doing a little education. Helps me understand that she knows what she's talking about, why she's doing this, and then she gave information exactly what was in the form, if you will. Then she went on to say the informed consent form indicated that participation in the study was voluntary. Participant identity and survey information would remain confidential. Little risk was involved in participation. A participant may withdraw at any time from the study. There was no cost or remuneration for participation, and there is significance of the study for the field of organizational leadership. These are the things I had mentioned earlier in the lesson about what should be in there. She's helping me as the reader of this to gain a sense what was in that survey, that there was no cost involved, that she wasn't paying anybody, and gave a little information about the significance of the study to organizational leadership. A little bit, again, about the purpose of the study. She continued on with the informed consent form was translated into Turkish to ensure participant understanding of all aspects of the study participation. You'll go to Appendix D and you'll see how the information there was translated. If you're going to do any translation because you're doing research in an area where perhaps English is not the first language of the survey population, you will have to go ahead and make sure that your informed consent form is translated. She continued on with saying participants provided a signature on the consent form to acknowledge their understanding of the study and participation criteria. Now, this is only a couple of paragraphs worth of information, but that's all she needed. Dr. Joseph Hagee, in his work in 2013, in his award-winning dissertation for quantitative study, Influence of Religion and Religiosity on Leadership Practices in the Workplace, a Quantitative Correlation Study, shares this. Participants in the research received an introductory electronic mail with a link to a consent form assuring them of their identity as well as their data sets would remain confidential. Confidentiality and anonymity of the participants are essential to increase the survey response rate. And he cited Newman. Again, he's educating the reader. He's helping us to better understand. He knows why this is important. Each participant was identified using a unique code. Remember that code, for the sole purposes of following up with electronic mail reminders to those who did not fill out the survey. Completed survey data were stored securely and protected during and after this study was completed. Now here, he didn't really go into much information, but in the next sentence he says the researcher carried the paper documents in a locked briefcase and stored them in a combination fireproof safe until the researcher loaded the questionnaires into the online survey system. You get a sense for how he protected that information. After a period of 3 years, all electronic data will be erased and wiped from the disk storage. The identity of participants will never be revealed to anyone through any method. This makes me feel comfortable that he knows about confidentiality and he's going to protect that information. No person other than the researcher will possess or access the collected data, the names of the participants in perpetuity. No survey data will be shared or transferred to a third party. He went to excruciating detail in Chapter 3. Now, Dr. Joe Hagee went through excruciating detail in every chapter, and I believe this is why he won the Dissertation of the Year award. And I encourage you, if you're doing your work in a quantitative method in particular, is to download his dissertation and see how he did it. Even if you're doing qualitative work, there's a lot of information you can still glean from his information that he provides in his study. Now finally, Dr. Susan Kristiniak in 2011, in her dissertation, Exploring the Experiences of Complementary Therapy Nurses, a qualitative phenomenological study, indicated Pollitt and Beck in 2006 discussed that research be attentive to the ethical considerations when interviewing participants to protect unwanted questioning and contributing to physical or emotional harm. This helps us to understand that she's aware of the considerations that are needed to protect the participants. She continued on with Newman, noted that privacy and confidentiality are key factors for the safety of research participants, and these guarantees are paramount to the ethical conduct of investigators. Again, she's educating the public and helping us to better understand she knows what she's doing and why what she's doing. Confidentiality of participants was assured through omission of identifying information or comment from the text. Each participant was assigned a code. Remember, I talked about a code to assure respondent privacy in transcription and the reporting process. Transcription of text, audio tapes, and information consents were stored in a locked location during the gathering and analysis of data. Materials will be kept for 3 years following completion of the research. After 3 years, all records will be shredded, deleted from the databases, and incinerated. Here she tells us how it was protected, what she's going to do, and 3 years later, how she's going to dispose of everything. As always, Chapter 3 reflects your critical thinking. It shows your discerning knowledge of research. It helps people to know that not only what you're going to do, but you know what you're going to do. Remember, this is still that academic exercise, the doctoral dissertation. It helps to inform the reader of these types of approaches. You must be an expert and have to relate your subject matter expertise. In confidentiality as well as in consent, this is part of relating your subject matter expertise, that you're aware and sensitive to the needs of informed consent to protect your survey population, whether it be at the time of information when you're gaining it and later as you're putting your work together and years after it's published. The end result your work is going to inform others of your choices and the rationale for your choices. More dissertations get denied, in my view, and proposals that do not get approved tend to be because they did give information, but there's not enough information about the rationale for their choices. Oftentimes, the rationale for your choices can come from providing a little bit of education, much like some of my mentees did when they referred back to Creswell or Newman. They help us to better understand that what they're going to do, what the guidance is behind it, and what actual steps they're going to do or have done. Again, Chapter 3 contains what kind of details? Yep, excruciating details. The more details you build in from the very beginning, the less chance you'll have of your work not being approved on the first time. As part of the reflective summary, I did give information about informed consent, what its purpose was, how you might produce that informed consent form, how you're going to get signatures or approvals by your participants, whether it be signing it literally by hand, with a pen on a piece of paper, or electronically, or some other means that's required by your university for the type of research you're collecting. Then I provided several examples from my mentees. I gave you 2 examples from quantitative studies and 1 from a qualitative study. I hope they were helpful to you. If you want to learn more, please just back up this lesson, find their names, and go into ProQuest Dissertations and download their dissertations. I do believe that education is a lot like life. Mostly, like I've been telling you, so is your dissertation, that the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. The more details you can do into your work now, the easier it's going to be to get through your work later. I want to thank you for being attentive during this lesson. If you have any questions, you can always send it to me at drrichschuttler.com. I'd be happy to help you at any time. This concludes this lesson.